They spat on her in broad daylight, and she did not wipe it away. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your town below, and if you believe justice doesn't always need a gun, stay with me. The sun hung low over Dry Creek, turning dust into gold and faces into shadows, and right there in the center of Main Street stood Ayanna Redbird, still as a fence post in the wind, her dark hair catching the light, her cheek marked not by anger, but by silence. A man laughed. Another shook his head like he'd already decided who she was. Shouldn't have come here, someone muttered, boots scraping wood as the crowd tightened just enough to make space feel smaller. Ayanna didn't answer. She didn't step back. At her feet, a small leather pouch lay half-crushed, its stitching split, a few pale herbs scattered into the dirt like something fragile that had no place in this town. She lowered her eyes, not in shame, but to gather what could still be saved. Fingers steady, breath even. Like this wasn't the first time the world tried to weigh her worth and came up wrong. From the porch across the street, Caleb Whitmore leaned against a weathered post, hat brim low, saying nothing. He had seen plenty in this town. Men who spoke too loud. Men who judged too quick. But there was something different in the way she moved. Careful, deliberate. Like every motion carried meaning beyond what anyone here understood. The wind shifted. Just a little. Enough to lift the edge of her dress. Enough to stir the dust between them. Someone nudged the pouch with the toe of a boot. Careless, like it was nothing. It rolled. Stopped. And from its torn seam, something slipped free. A thin chain. Silver. It caught the sunlight for half a second. Just enough. Caleb's gaze sharpened. The shape at the end of that chain wasn't decoration. It was a mark. Old. Familiar in a way that made his chest tighten without warning. Ayanna saw it too. She bent, slow, unhurried, and picked it up before the dust could claim it. Her thumb brushed across the symbol like it was more than metal, like it was memory. Around her, the voices softened, not out of kindness, but uncertainty. Because something had changed, though no one could say what. The air felt different. Heavier. Like the kind of quiet that comes before a storm you don't see yet, but feel in your bones. Caleb straightened just a little, eyes no longer drifting, fixed now on the girl in the street. Not because she asked for help. Not because she needed saving. But because she wasn't what they thought she was. And somewhere beyond the edge of town, too far for most to notice, something else had already begun to move. The town did not breathe the same way anymore. Not after that moment when the silver caught the sun and refused to look like something small. Ayanna closed her fingers around the necklace, and for the first time lifted her gaze, not high, not proud, just level, like she was meeting the world exactly where it stood. The men who had been speaking the loudest found less to say. Boots shifted, a cough somewhere near the saloon door. Sheriff Harlan Pike rested his hand along his belt, not reaching. Just feeling the weight of something he could not quite name. Authority maybe, or doubt. You got business here? He asked, voice careful, like stepping across thin ice. Ayanna did not answer right away. She brushed the last of the dirt from the broken pouch, gathered what little remained into her palm, and only then spoke, her voice soft but clear enough to carry across the wooden fronts and open windows. Medicine, she said, nothing more. No explanation, no apology, just the truth placed down like a stone. Duke Renshaw let out a short laugh that did not quite reach his eyes. Medicine for who? He pressed, leaning forward as if the question itself might push her back. Ayanna tilted her head just slightly, as if considering whether the answer mattered here. Then she said, for someone who does not have time to wait. And something in the way she said it made the words feel heavier than they should have been. Like time itself had a shape, and it was running thin. Caleb Whitmore shifted on the porch. The wood creaked under his boot. He had heard voices like hers before, not loud, not begging, just steady, the kind that did not ask permission to exist. His eyes moved from the necklace to her face, then to the horizon beyond the last building where the land opened into pale grass and long distance. The wind carried a faint sound again, too soft for most to notice, but it was there, steady, repeating, like a rhythm that did not belong to this town. Sheriff Pike cleared his throat. You should move along, he said, but there was less command in it now. More suggestion, like he was hoping she would make his decision easier. Ayanna looked down at the crushed herbs in her hand, then at the empty space inside the torn pouch, and for a brief moment, Something passed across her face, not fear, not anger. Something quieter, like calculation. Then she reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small piece of cloth, wrapped the remaining herbs with care, tied it tight, and slipped it back into the pouch as if it still mattered, because to her, it did. Duke shook his head. You people always carry things that do not belong here, he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. As if the ground beneath him had shifted just enough to make him unsure of his footing, Iona stepped forward, not toward them, but through them, a narrow path opening without anyone quite deciding to make it. She walked past the sheriff, past the man who had laughed, past the place where her necklace had touched the dust, and she did not look back. Caleb watched her go, watched the way the street seemed to stretch longer around her, like distance had changed its mind, and then he heard it clearer this time. Not wind, not thunder, something else, something many, something approaching with purpose. He lifted his head slightly, eyes narrowing toward the horizon, and under his breath, so quiet no one else caught it, he said, "That is not weather coming." The sound did not rush in all at once. It built itself slowly, like something patient, something certain, a low rhythm carried across miles of open land where nothing ever hid for long. Iona kept walking, her steps even, her shoulders steady, the torn pouch now resting quiet in her hand, as if it still held more than anyone here could see. Behind her the town lingered in a silence it did not understand. Sheriff Pike turned his head slightly toward the horizon, eyes narrowing against the light. "You hear that?" he said, though he did not look at anyone in particular. Duke Renshaw let out a short breath through his nose. "Wind," he answered too quickly, but even he did not believe it, because the sound had weight. It repeated, measured, like something with intent. Caleb Whitmore stepped off the porch, boots touching the dust with a quiet finality. He did not move toward Iona. He did not call out. He simply stood where he could see both her and the line where the land met the sky. And for a long second nothing else happened. Then someone at the far end of the street stopped what they were doing and looked out past the last building. Then another, and another, until the entire town seemed to turn without being told, drawn by something older than curiosity, something closer to instinct. Iona did not turn. She reached the edge of the street where the hard-packed dirt gave way to open ground. And there she paused, not out of hesitation, but as if she had arrived exactly where she meant to be. Her fingers loosened slightly around the pouch, her other hand resting near the silver chain now hidden again beneath the fabric of her dress. The rhythm grew clearer, not loud, but undeniable, like a heartbeat stretched across distance. Sheriff Pike took a step forward, then stopped, something in him refusing to cross an invisible line he could not explain. Duke shifted his weight, glancing at the others as if searching for the version of himself that had stood louder just minutes ago, but it was gone, replaced by something quieter, something unsure. Caleb's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, and then he saw it. Not detail, not faces, just movement, small at first, like shadows lifting from the ground, then more, then many, the kind of number that does not announce itself. It simply exists until you realize it has always been there. His jaw tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. He had seen formations like that once, long ago, not in this town, not in this life. But he knew what it meant when people moved together without sound, without rush, without needing to prove anything. "They are not coming to chase," he said quietly, though no one had asked. "They are coming because they already know." The words settled into the air heavier than anything before. Iona lifted her chin just slightly, not enough for pride, just enough for breath. The wind touched her face again, softer now, carrying the same rhythm closer, closer, until even the smallest child standing behind the general store could hear it and fall still. And then, at the far edge of sight, the shapes became real, not one, not 10, but a line that stretched wider than the town itself. Riders holding their place, not crossing forward, not raising voices, simply there, like a horizon that had decided to move. And in that moment, every person in Dry Creek understood. Something without needing it explained. The day had not changed, the sun had not moved, but the weight of what they had done now stood where it could be seen, and Iona, still facing forward, took one more step into the open, as if the distance between her and them had never been distance at all. No one gave the order to move, and yet the entire town shifted without a sound, like something unseen had passed through them and left everything slightly different. Sheriff Pike removed his hand from his belt slowly, not because he had decided anything, but because the weight of it no longer felt useful. Duke Renshaw swallowed once, then again, his eyes fixed on the line of riders that now stretched across the horizon like a living boundary. They should not be this close, he muttered though. No one answered him, because everyone could see the same thing. The riders were not advancing. They were not forming for anything. They had simply arrived and chosen to stop, and somehow that was worse. Ayanna stood alone between the town and the open land. The space behind her no longer empty, but filled with presence. Not loud, not demanding, just there, steady as the ground itself. The wind moved through her hair again, softer now, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dust and distance. Caleb Whitmore stepped down from the edge of the street, boots pressing into the open ground, not approaching her directly, not stepping in front, just closing the distance enough to stand where he could see her clearly. "You knew they were coming," he said, his voice low, not accusing, not surprised, just stating what had become obvious. Ayanna did not turn her head. Her eyes stayed forward, fixed on something beyond the riders, beyond the land, somewhere only she could measure. "No," she answered. After a moment, "I knew they would hear." The words settled between them, quiet but unshakable. Caleb nodded once, as if that made more sense than anything else that had happened that day. Behind them, the town remained still. Men who had spoken loudly now found their voices gone. Women who had watched from windows leaned back into shadow, and even the smallest movements felt too heavy to carry forward. Sheriff Pike took another step, then stopped again, his authority no longer something he could place between himself and what stood beyond the edge of town. "This is not necessary," he called out. Though his voice lacked the reach it once had, it did not travel far, did not carry weight. It simply faded into the space between where he stood and where the riders waited, and none of them responded, not a single movement, not a single shift in line. They remained as they were, not there to answer, not there to argue, just present. Duke glanced around as if expecting someone else to speak, someone else to take back control of the moment. But no one did, because control had already left the room, and it had not done so with force. It had simply walked away. Ayanna lifted her hand slowly and touched the silver chain beneath her dress, her fingers resting over it for a brief second, like a reminder, like something anchoring her to a truth that did not change based on who stood watching. Then she lowered her hand and took one step forward, not toward the riders, not away from the town, just forward, as if claiming the space beneath her feet as her own. Caleb watched that step more closely than anything else, because it was not defiance, it was not fear, it was something else entirely, something quieter and far more difficult to name, something that did not ask permission and did not wait for agreement. Sheriff Pike removed his hat slowly, the gesture small but heavy, not for her, not for the riders, but for himself. For the moment he realized he had stood in the wrong place and said nothing when it mattered. Duke saw it and looked away, unable to hold the weight of it. And out beyond them, the riders did not move, because they did not need to. The line they formed was already enough. And in that stillness, in that quiet that stretched longer than any shout could reach, the town of Dry Creek understood something it had never been forced to face before, that some things did not come to demand justice. They came to reveal it. And Ayanna Redbird, standing alone yet not alone at all, did not look back to see who followed, because she already knew. The silence did not break. It settled deeper, like dust after a long ride. And in that stillness Ayanna Redbird took another step forward, not hurried, not hesitant, just certain, the kind of step that does not ask what comes next because it already knows where it stands. Behind her the line of riders remained unmoved, not a single horse shifting out of place, not a single voice rising to claim attention. They did not need to be seen to be understood. They simply existed, and that was enough. Caleb Whitmore watched the distance between her and them as if measuring something invisible, the kind of distance that is not counted in feet or yards but in meaning, and he realized it was not closing. It had never been there to begin with. Sheriff Pike lowered his gaze to the ground for a moment, boots planted where they had always been. yet somehow no longer belonging to him. "We did not know," he said, though the words sounded thin even to his own ears, because knowing had never been the question. Ayana did not turn to him, did not grant the comfort of acknowledgement. Her voice came soft, steady, carrying just enough to reach without needing to travel far. "You did not ask," she said, and the truth in it landed heavier than anything spoken before. Duke Renshaw shifted again. The man who had once filled the street with noise now unable to hold a single word in place. He looked toward the riders, then back to the town, then down at the dust where the crushed herbs had been scattered, as if searching for something to restore the moment he had lost. But moments like that do not return. They move on without asking. Caleb took one slow step forward, stopping just behind Ayana, not beside her, not in front, just there, a witness, nothing more, nothing less. His hat remained in his hand now, not out of habit, but because something in him refused to place it back where it once belonged. The wind passed through again, lighter, carrying no warning this time, only presence, the kind that fills a place without disturbing it. Ayana's fingers brushed the edge of the pouch, feeling its emptiness, measuring what remained. Then she looked out across the open land once more, not searching, not waiting, simply seeing, and after a long moment she began to walk, not toward the town, not toward the riders, but along the line where both worlds met, a path no one else had noticed until she chose it. And as she moved, something shifted behind her, not quickly, not all at once, but enough. The riders followed, not closing in, not surrounding, just aligning, like a shadow that does not belong to the ground but moves with the one who casts it. The town watched, no one speaking, no one stepping forward to stop what they could not name. Sheriff Pike placed his hat back on his head slowly, though it did not sit the same. Duke turned his face away, unable to hold the sight any longer, and Caleb Whitmore remained where he stood, eyes steady, following her path as it stretched beyond the edge of Dry Creek. And in that moment, without a single command given, without a single voice raised, the town understood what had been decided, not by force, not by numbers, but by something quieter, something that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. And Ayana Redbird, walking that narrow line between dust and distance, did not slow, did not look back, because she no longer needed to prove where she stood. The path she chose did not belong to the town, and it did not belong to the open land either. It ran between them like a quiet truth no one had named before. Ayana walked it without slowing, her steps leaving faint marks in the dust that the wind did not rush to erase, as if even the air understood something had shifted beyond its place. Behind her the riders moved in the same steady rhythm, not closing distance, not spreading wider, simply following the line she had drawn without ever turning to claim it. Caleb Whitmore stood at the edge of Dry Creek until the distance between him and her became something he could no longer ignore. Then he stepped forward, not quickly, not boldly, just enough to place himself where the town ended and something else began. Sheriff Pike watched him go, the badge on his chest feeling heavier than it had that morning, not because it had changed, but because he had, and he could not find the place where it fit anymore. "Where are you going?" he called out, though his voice lacked the reach to stop anything. Caleb did not turn, did not answer, because some questions do not need words, they answer themselves in the direction a man chooses to walk. Duke Renshaw remained near the center of the street, alone now in a way he had never been before, the absence of noise around him louder than any crowd he had once led. He bent slightly, brushing his hand across the dirt where the herbs had been scattered, as if trying to gather something back, but there was nothing left to hold, nothing left to fix. Ayana slowed for the first time, not stopping, just easing her pace, as if allowing something behind her to settle into place. The silver chain beneath her dress caught against the fabric and she adjusted it with a small, practiced motion, her fingers resting over it for a brief second, not out of habit, but out of memory, something old, something carried through time rather than distance. Caleb came within a few steps of her now, still not beside her, still not speaking, just present. And for a moment the two of them moved along the same line without needing to acknowledge it. The riders behind shifted almost imperceptibly, not reacting to him, not questioning, simply adjusting as the path widened to include what it needed. The town of Dry Creek stood behind them, Smaller now, not in size, but in weight. The buildings unchanged, the dust the same, yet everything within it felt thinner, like a story that had lost its hold on itself. Sheriff Pike removed his badge slowly, turning it once in his hand as if seeing it for the first time, then slipped it into his pocket without ceremony. No one noticed, no one needed to. Duke remained where he was, eyes fixed on the backs of those leaving, and for the first time that day, he said nothing at all. Ayanna lifted her gaze toward the distance ahead, the land stretching wide and open under the late afternoon sun, and something in her expression softened, not relief, not victory, something quieter, like a weight that had never been hers beginning to fall away. Caleb finally spoke, his voice low, careful. "The medicine," he said, not a question, just a reminder. Ayanna nodded once, her hand tightening slightly around the pouch. "It will still be enough," she answered, and the certainty in her voice did not come from what remained inside it, but from something else entirely, something no one in Dry Creek had thought to measure. And as they walked, the line of riders followed, not as protection, not as threat, but as witness, and the path ahead did not change to meet them. It had always been there, waiting for someone to walk it without asking who owned the ground beneath their feet. The sun had begun its slow fall toward the edge of the land, stretching shadows longer across the dry ground. And still Ayanna walked without looking back, the rhythm of her steps steady as if guided by something deeper than direction. Caleb Whitmore matched that rhythm now, not beside her, not leading, simply there, a presence that did not interrupt the silence, but moved within it. The riders followed at the same distance, their line unbroken, their purpose unchanged, and somewhere between each step the world seemed to grow quieter, not empty, but full in a way that did not need sound to prove itself. The land opened wider ahead, a low rise just beyond where the town disappeared from view. And as they reached it, Ayanna slowed again, her gaze shifting slightly to the left where a narrow trail cut through the grass, almost hidden unless you knew where to look. She turned onto it without hesitation, the path bending away from the main road, away from anything that carried a name. Caleb noticed the shift and followed, his eyes scanning the ground, the horizon, the riders behind, everything and nothing at once. "You are not going far," he said quietly, not a question, just an observation shaped into words. Ayanna shook her head once, her hand tightening slightly around the pouch. "Far enough," she replied, and there was something in the way she said it that suggested distance was not measured in miles. The trail narrowed as they moved, the grass brushing against their legs, the air cooler here, softer, carrying a faint scent of water that had not been seen yet. The riders adjusted again, their line bending gently to follow the path without breaking its shape. No one spoke, no one signaled, and yet everything aligned, as if they had walked this same path long before today. Caleb's gaze dropped briefly to the pouch in her hand, then to the way she held it, careful but not desperate, and he understood something then, something he had missed before. "It is not just medicine," he said, more to himself than to her. Ayanna did not answer right away. She walked a few more steps, then said, "It is what someone is waiting for." And that was all. No detail, no explanation, just enough to make the meaning settle where it needed to. The trail curved again, rising slightly, and beyond it, tucked into the land like it had always belonged there, a small structure came into view. Not a house, not quite a cabin, something simpler, built from wood that had weathered the same seasons. As the ground around it, smoke did not rise from it. No movement showed at the door, but the space around it felt held, as if it had not been forgotten. Ayanna stopped a few feet from the entrance, her shoulders easing for the first time, not fully, just enough to show the weight she carried had reached its place. Caleb remained a step behind, his eyes moving from the structure to her, then back again. The riders came to a stop behind them, the line settling without sound, without dust, like a horizon that had decided it had reached its end. And still no one spoke, because nothing here required it. Ayanna lifted her hand and knocked once against the wooden frame, the sound soft, almost lost in the open air, and for a moment, nothing answered. Then from inside, a faint movement, slow, careful, like time itself was taking its time to respond. Caleb held his breath without realizing it, the world narrowing to that small doorway, to that single moment where everything that had happened led, and Iona stood there, not waiting, not hoping, simply present, as if she had never doubted the door would open. The door did not open all at once. It shifted slowly, like the wood itself needed to remember how to move and when. It did. It revealed not a figure of strength, not a presence that matched the line of riders behind her, but someone small, older than the years could easily hold, a man wrapped in a worn blanket, his frame thin, his eyes steady in a way that did not belong to weakness. He looked at Iona first, not surprised, not confused, just certain, as if her arrival had been expected long before the dust of Dry Creek had settled on her dress. Iona stepped forward without a word, her hand opening to reveal the small bundle of herbs she had gathered back from the ground. Not whole, not perfect, but enough. She placed it gently into his hands, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The man's fingers closed around it slowly, feeling its weight, not measuring what was missing, only recognizing what remained. "You took your time," he said softly, his voice like dry leaves carried by wind. And Iona allowed the faintest breath of something like a smile to pass across her face. The road asked questions, she replied, and the man nodded once, as if that answered everything that needed to be said. Caleb Whitmore stood just behind, watching the exchange with a stillness he had not known he could hold, because nothing here was dramatic, nothing demanded attention, and yet it carried more weight than anything he had witnessed before. The riders remained behind them, unmoving, their presence no longer something distant, but something that belonged to this place now, as natural as the ground beneath their feet. The man inside the doorway turned slightly, stepping back just enough to allow Iona to enter. She did, without hesitation, disappearing into the dim light of the small structure. And for a brief moment, the world outside paused. Caleb did not follow. He remained where he stood, his gaze fixed on the open doorway, on the quiet space where something unseen was unfolding. The wind passed through again, carrying no urgency, no warning, only the steady rhythm that had brought them here. And then, after what felt longer than time could measure, Iona stepped back out, her hands empty now, the pouch no longer needed, her shoulders lighter, her breath deeper. She paused at the threshold, looking down at the ground for a brief second, then lifted her gaze toward the open land once more. The man behind her remained in the doorway, his eyes moving past her to the line of riders, and he inclined his head slightly, not in greeting, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Something quiet passed between them, something no one else could name. And then he stepped back, the door closing just as slowly as it had opened, sealing the moment without ceremony. Caleb exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath, and in that exhale, something inside him shifted, something he had carried without knowing its weight. The riders behind began to move again, not forward, not closer, but turning, their line bending away from the cabin, from the path, as if their purpose had been fulfilled without ever needing to be spoken. Iona watched them for a moment, not with gratitude, not with command, simply with understanding, and then she turned as well, stepping away from the doorway, away from the place she had come to reach, her path now different, not because the land had changed, but because she had. And Caleb, standing just behind, realized that whatever had brought them here was no longer unfinished. It had simply needed to be seen, and now that it had been, the silence that followed did not feel heavy, it felt complete. The trail did not look the same on the way back, though nothing in the land had changed. The same grass bent in the same wind, the same sky stretched wide above them, and yet each step felt lighter, as if something unseen had been set down and left behind without ceremony. Iona walked ahead, her hands now empty, the pouch gone, its purpose finished without needing to be remembered. Caleb Whitmore followed a few paces behind, his boots pressing into the same earth that had carried them here. But his stride no longer measured distance. It followed something quieter, something he had not known how to name before this day. Behind them, the riders continued to turn, their line dissolving not into disorder but into absence, one by one, like shadows retreating with the lowering sun. No signal given, no leader calling them away. They simply knew when their presence was no longer required, and they left as they had arrived, without sound, without demand, until the horizon was empty again. As if it had never held them at all, Ayana did not watch them go. She did not need to. Her gaze remained forward, fixed on the path that led back toward Dry Creek, though it no longer felt like a place she needed to return to, only a place she would pass through. Caleb slowed slightly, his eyes drifting once more toward where the riders had been, and for a moment he wondered if he had imagined it, if the weight of it all had been something his mind had shaped from the silence. But the ground beneath his feet held the faintest marks, not clear, not lasting. Just enough to say that something real had stood there. And that was enough. They reached the edge of town as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the empty street. Dry Creek looked the same as it had before, the same buildings, the same dust, but it did not feel the same. Sheriff Pike stood near the center now, his posture changed, not straighter, not weaker, just different. Like a man who had set something down and had not yet decided what to pick up in its place. Duke Renshaw remained off to the side, his voice gone, his presence smaller, not because anyone had taken it from him, but because something inside him had chosen to let it fall. Ayana stepped onto the street without pause, walking the same ground where she had stood before, but this time no one moved to block her path. No one spoke. No one looked away. The space opened without being asked, and she crossed it as if it had always belonged to her. Caleb followed, stopping only once, just long enough to glance toward the place where the crushed herbs had fallen earlier. But there was nothing there now, no trace, no reminder, as if the moment had taken itself with it. Ayana reached the far side of town and did not slow, did not turn. She simply continued, her figure growing smaller against the wide land beyond. And for a long moment, no one in Dry Creek moved, not because they were afraid, but because they understood, in a way that did not require words, that something had been shown to them, something they could not undo. Sheriff Pike removed his hat again, this time not out of uncertainty, but out of respect. Though he did not call out, did not ask forgiveness, he simply stood there, holding the weight of what had passed. Duke lowered his gaze, not in shame that could be spoken, but in something quieter, something that would remain long after this day faded. Caleb Whitmore watched Ayana until the distance softened her into the horizon, and then he placed his hat back on his head, not the same way he had worn it before, but in a way that fit what he had become. He turned slightly, not back toward the town, not fully toward the open land, just enough to stand between both, and in that stillness, the wind moved once more through Dry Creek, carrying nothing with it, because everything that needed to be said had already been left behind.